Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Tackett's House of Horsepower. I'm Steve Tackett. How y'all doing this morning? Me, it's a little bit cold. I know I live in Arizona, and you're probably laughing at me right now, but it does get very cold in Arizona. It was like 32 degrees last night, so it's a little bit cold. I got my coffee, so here we go. We're going to continue working on Okie's little 283. Hopefully you guys have figured out who Okie is. Okie is our little 65 Nova Wagon that is fairly original, and I'm doing my best to keep it that way. So my goal was to rebuild the engine that's in it, but then I decided, well, I'd kind of like to put it back to original as much as possible. So I tracked down a 283 that has the correct recessed oil filter, you know, the 194 casting, pretty rare engine. They only made them in 64, 5, 6, and 7. You Nova guys probably already know that. I did track one down. Luckily, the one that I found, it was down in Tucson, so it wasn't very far. And the guy that took it out of the original car, and he gave me all the brackets and pulleys and the correct exhaust manifolds. Yes, even the passenger side, very difficult to find Nova passenger side air conditioned bracket on the exhaust manifold passenger side. So I snapped it up right away, and it was sitting under my bench for the last year and a half or so. I was sidetracked with other projects, so I didn't get to it till now. Okie is running and driving just fine with the 283 that's in there, but I would kind of like to take it back down and put this 283 in it, and I'd like to maybe even try to put the original power steering and everything back on it. And so yeah, that's where I'm at, and we are going to continue today with the rest of the bottom half of the engine, probably thinking cam, timing chain, pistons, rods, some more bearings. So lots to do today. So yeah, let's get to it. Here's what we're looking at today. We're looking at a giant mess. My workbench is a disaster. That is not for Okie. That's for Okie. Not that. That is for Okie. We're not putting that on a stock 283. Anyway, my workbench is a disaster. It's a mess. I got parts on the floor. I got parts everywhere. Pistons, rods, rings, bearings, cam, timing chain, you name it, it's all here. It's a mess. We got to go through this. I hate it. I hate it when my workbench looks like this. I get so, I don't know, I have OCD or something. I don't like the cluster stuff just everywhere. So hopefully we're going to take some of this and we're going to put it over here under this. We're going to condense everything into one monstrous 283 we got here. So yeah, that's what we're doing today. So I guess we'll start with the camshaft. Oh, by the way, get yourself an old office chair that's all tore up and beat up. It's great. It's the best shop chair slash sliding workbench slash whatever. Get an old office chair. It's great. I think we'll start with, I was going to do pistons first, but I guess we'll do camshaft first because I'm tired of tripping on it because it's on the floor. Anyway, so on this 283, against my better judgment, we are going to put a flat tappet camshaft in it. Yes, I know. If you've done any research in the last 10 or 20 years, you'll know that flat tappet camshafts are basically obsolete because of the crappy oil that we get nowadays. The break-in on these cams is critical. If the lifter doesn't seat right to the cam lobe, it will self-destruct. It will eat itself. The lobe will disappear, metal shavings in the oil. It's a bad deal. It's happened to me twice now. I had a 66 El Camino. I did a little 350 on that, and it about a month later I started hearing did a valve adjustment, 2 or 3 rocker arms were loose. I drove it a little bit longer thinking, oh, maybe it'll be all right. No, it wasn't all right. 3 lobes were flat, metal shavings everywhere. It was a disaster. It happened again on a 66 Stingray I did for a customer. He wanted a 327 rebuilt back to original, and he wanted the old 3030 Duntov in it and everything. So I warned him. I tried to talk him out of it. He said no. He wanted it back to the way it was. So I did a 3030 Duntov. It ran great. I even have a test stand that I break them in, check everything. It was great. Put it in the car. It lasted about a month. Same thing. 1 or 2 lifters did not seat and ate the camshafts. Metal shavings everywhere. So if you're smart, you'll go with a roller cam, a hydraulic roller cam for everything. Street, mild performance, even to pretty wild performance. A hydraulic roller is the way to go. If you're going bigger performance, like the Chevelle over here, it's a solid roller. That's what everyone's gonna do. In fact, here, I'll show you on this one right here. This is a solid roller. And yeah, the lifters do not spin. They are attached together by this little bar. It keeps the lifter from rotating, and it just rides up and down on the camshaft with these rollers. That's why it's called a roller cam. A flat tappet cam is just what it sounds like. It is flat, and it uses the friction of the lobe on the cam to cause the lifter to spin. If the lifter does not spin, it will just eat itself, eat the lobe, and you're gonna have a bad day. So I hope this video doesn't come back to bite me later, because I am going to put a flat tappet cam in this 283. So wish me luck. I hope this doesn't come back to bite me. The best insurance you can do is get yourself some break-in oil. It's gonna say break-in oil on it right there, or it'll say racing oil. What it is it's the zinc and phosphates in it, and you can search all this on the internet. You can spend hours running down the rabbit hole on zinc and phosphates in the oil, and what oils are best, and you can get into huge arguments with everybody about this. But what it comes down to is modern vehicles have catalytic converters, and the catalytic converters don't like zinc. All engines burn a little bit of oil. So if any of that zinc burning off gets into the catalytic converter, it's going to cause the catalytic converter to fail prematurely. So the automotive manufacturers decided to take all the zinc out of the oil. So what does that mean? It means the old engines like this one with flat tappet cams are not happy. So if you're smart, you'll upgrade to a roller cam. If you're like me, we're gonna roll the dice, and hopefully we're gonna buy good oil and see what happens. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to blow out my oil galleys one more time. There's 3 oil galleys right there. That's why I left the plugs out till now, so I can clean them one more time, blow everything out. All the lifter bores, I want to blow those out. We're going to blow these out, and then we're going to put our plugs in, and we're going to plug those holes. Okay, I got my oil galley plugs in. These ones I just tapped in. Originally, that's how they all were. If you want to get fancy with it, get yourself a 1/4 NPT tap and an NPT pipe plug, and you can tap those holes, tap them in deep enough that you can get that all the way in. The problem with that is it creates a lot of metal shavings. So if you're going to do that, if you're going to delete those plugs and put pipe plugs in it, then you need to do that before you start installing bearings and crank, and you would have to do that right away. So it's the metal shavings. You need to make sure you get all the metal shavings out of the block before you start final assembly. So if you're going to do this, you need to do it first. I'm not worried about it on this engine. I'm not even using a high volume oil pump on this engine, so it's really not necessary. But if this was a drag racing application, or if I was using a high volume oil pump with a lot of pressure and high rev, then this is the way to go. But do it first and make sure you get all the metal shavings out of those oil passages before you do any assembly. So any drilling and tapping or cutting or grinding, if you're doing a 383 and you got to cut the webbing in here for the stroker, if you're doing any grinding, cutting, anything that's creating metal shavings, you better do that first before you begin final assembly. So but again, I ain't worried about it on this engine, but something to think about. Alright, so we're going to put the camshaft in. So first thing you do is get it out of the box, inspect it for damage, any dings or dents, you don't want it. You'll always see, usually on the back side of the cam, you'll see your part number right there. Double check the part number, make sure they sent you the right one. And let me tell you, this thing is a monster. 213 degrees of duration at 50, 430 lift on a 110 lobe center. This thing is going to make power, let me tell you. So the first thing you notice is it's kind of sticky. They put a rust inhibitor on it, or cosmoline, whatever. You want to clean that off. It has to be clean, 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 clean. So get all that off there. Carb cleaner works great. I love it. So carb cleaner this thing up, dry it all off, get it off there, get all the sticky stuff off, and then we'll be ready to slide it in. Oh, before you slide it in, never slide it in dry. I like to use Okie lube, or it does come with some in the box. I don't know what this is. It's what Howard sends you. Whatever you do, don't lose your stickers. You want those. That's important. But yeah, get it clean, and then we'll start putting it in. All right, so now that the camshaft is clean, we can start putting it in. What I do is I lube it up about halfway, and I mean, you can buy a fancy cam install tool handle thing if you want to, or you can make one, or you could just use a gear. Put the gear on with the bolts just finger tight. That's going to be my handle here in a second. So I get it on here, get it covered. I mean, cover the lobes. Don't be shy. Put that cam lube on the entire lobe, cover it. Then about halfway. So then we're gonna take it, start sliding it in here. Be real careful, go slow. I don't want to scratch the bearings, I don't want to scratch the lobes. It's almost like that game when you were a kid, Operation. Slide it in, and then go ahead and stop right there. Then continue with the lube. And again, don't be shy with this stuff. Put it on there. Get it on there. Cover these lobes all the way around. Just like that. Cover it completely. Get a little bit on the back side of the camshaft too, where it's going to ride up against the block. Like that. Now we're going to grip this and we're going to keep sliding it all the way in. Make sure it spins nice and free, and that's it. It's in. It shouldn't have any tight spots. If you're spinning that and it feels tight anywhere, something's wrong. There's something in the bearing, or maybe the bearings are, you could have core shift on the block. Anything like that, you got to stop and disassemble, take it back to the machine shop if you have to. That thing should slide all the way in, and you should be able to spin it with one finger smooth. So there you go, it's in. Okay, next thing we got to do is we're going to go ahead and put the crank gear on. Now this timing chain set has 3 different possibilities. Some of them have a lot more, but this one has 3 possibilities. There is a 0, there's an A, and there's an R, if you can see that. So if you put it on the 0, what I mean by that is put the keyway on 0, the one that's marked 0. That's going to install the camshaft straight up, 0. If you go with the A or the R on the keyway, you got to go with the A or the R on the tooth. So if I wanted to advance or retard the camshaft 4 degrees, this one happens to be 4 degrees. If I put it on the R, I got to use the R tooth. If I use the A, I got to use the A tooth. That would be advanced 4 degrees or retarded 4 degrees. In this case, we're just going to install it straight up. So I'm going to ignore the other marks. I don't care about those marks. I'm only caring about the 0 on the keyway and the 0 on the 0 tooth. So now there's 2 ways to do this. They usually go on pretty easy, so you don't have to get too crazy. But so find the one that's marked 0, put the 0 on the keyway. Now you can tap that on with a hammer. I recommend not hitting it directly with your hammer. Don't do that. I got a chunk of brass that I use because this is gonna ding it up. You know, this is tool steel. This is hardened. You don't want to hit hardened steel with this. It's not good. Use a softer steel like brass. So you can tap this on with this and go around and work your way around and tap it on. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, especially if you don't have a hole in the crankshaft. Remember, my machine shop drilled and tapped that for me. Originally, most early small blocks, small journal small blocks, don't have that hole. So if you don't have that hole, you don't have a choice. You're gonna have to tap it on with a hammer. Or you can use, the way I like to do it is I use my harmonic balancer installer tool. So, and I got a spacer that I stick on here, and I use my harmonic balancer tool, and I just tighten it down until it hits bottom. Either way, you got to get that gear on all the way to the bottom until it bottoms out against the face of the crankshaft there. That's it. Get that done. Something like this. This is the way I like to do it. I use a harmonic balancer installation tool with a big old spacer. Then I can tighten that down. That big nut right there is going to suck this down until I get rid of that gap right there. This needs to be up against that face of that crankshaft right there. So I do this because I don't like to hit the crankshaft ever. Remember, every time if you like to put this gear on with a hammer, or you like to use a hammer on your harmonic balancer, think about this. Every time you hit this, you're putting all your impact, every impact is going to be taken up by your thrust bearing. So you're putting a lot of stress on that thrust bearing. Every time you smack this thing, that thrust bearing is going to take the impact. So I don't know, I don't like doing that. So if you can, this is the better method. We end up with something like this. The crank gear went all the way down flush. Remember, we're on 0, so we're using the 0. We're using the 0 tooth, and then we line it up with 0 on the cam gear. So I'm ignoring all the other marks. I don't need them. Ignore those. 0 on the keyway, 0 on that tooth. That tooth needs to line up with that tooth. Now this might be a little bit of overkill for this engine, but we're going to do this. I like to use cam buttons, and I like to use locking plates on everything, just because this will keep the bolts from ever coming loose or backing out, and the cam button will it's going to sit in there, and it's going to keep the cam. It keeps the cam from walking forward when the engine's under load or revving. It tends to, the cam wants to walk forward. That does some things to the cam. It can cause premature wear on the cam lobes and lifters. It can also change ignition timing. As the cam walks, it changes your distributor timing slightly, not much, but this is just insurance. The cam's going to be happier, the lifters are going to be happier, so it's worth a few bucks. This is what we end up with. The cam bolts are in, tightened to 35 foot-pounds. Then we fold the ears over on the lock plate. Then we got this bearing here in the middle. That's going to push up against the timing chain cover, and that will keep the cam from walking when it changes RPMs or anything like that. The cam wants to walk forward. So on a flat tappet cam, stock type motor, it's kind of overkill. But especially if you've got a roller cam, any kind of roller cam, hydraulic roller or solid roller, you have to put a cam button on it, or certain year blocks will have the cam plate. There's a plate behind there that would be bolted down to the, it'll fit over the snout of the camshaft. There'll be a step on the camshaft that'll hold it against it, so that would keep the cam from walking. So like I said earlier, those lifters don't spin, so if you have a roller cam or a roller style lifter, that cam, if it walks forward and backwards, it causes a lot of side load on the little bearings on the end of the lifter. So if you're running a roller cam, you have to have a cam plate or a button. But here it's just it's nice to have. If you got it, it's worth a few bucks. It's cheap insurance. So there you go, we got a camshaft in, and it's ready to go. We're gonna move on to pistons. Okay, we're about ready to start putting pistons in. Step one, just like any other step, is going to be clean it. Clean the block, clean the cylinders. I always use 100% cotton. Never use terry cloths or shop rags for this type of work. You don't want all that lint left behind. So 100% cotton, and we're going to wipe out all the cylinders. But there's a few things I want to point out. Being that this is a V8, Chevy V8, small block, big block, doesn't matter. If you look, one side is slightly closer to the front than the back. This is going to be the odds. Number one is always going to be the closest to the front. So number one is the closest to the front. Number two, number three, number four, number five, number six, number seven, number eight. So this side is all odds, 1, 3, 5, 7. This side is all evens, 2, 4, 6, 8. So why does that matter? Well, it's going to matter which direction the rod is and the piston is. So if you're looking down, you'll notice that the crankshaft down there, each rod journal is going to have 2 rods on it. So we need to lay them all out for odds and evens. And how do we do that? Let's take a look at them right here. I've got them laid out in order. I've got one in the front there. That's going to be my odds. This side's going to be my evens. There's something to look at. First of all, there's kind of a dead giveaway on these rods. You'll see a tang. One side has a tang, one side doesn't. You can kind of see it better here. The tangs should always point away from each other. So if these two are going to share a journal, the tangs are going to be away from each other. See that? So these two can go on the same journal. This tang and that tang are pointed away from each other. Why? I'll show you why. If you look at one, I've got this one cleaned and I've got a bearing in it right now. If you take this off, if I can get it off. Sorry about that. Now, take this cap and look at it, and you'll see doesn't want to cooperate. Anyways, if you look at a bearing, it's offset to one side. You see how I got a little bit more gap on this side than that side? The bearing is not centered in the cap. Why? Because we need this lip right here has a little bit bigger, more chamfer to it, and the bearing is towards the back. Because that being number one, it's going to be towards the front of the crankshaft. So that extra chamfer, that extra lip, is going to clear the radius of the crankshaft right here. So all of the odds need to have that space towards the front, and all of the evens need to have that space towards the rear. So again, if these two are going to share, that means that extra space is going to be here on this one and here on this one. Does that make sense? So odds and evens. Lay everything out. Make sure it's right. Don't trust the machine shop. What if they got one of these backwards? What if one piston is backwards? You don't know. You better check. Check everything and double check everything. Now, before I can start putting these pistons in, I need to assemble the rings and everything. So before I do that though, I want to check ring gap. And the way I do it is I take a piston and I put the oil ring on. This is a flat top piston, so if I put that oil ring on, I can use this as a gauge to set my ring down in the cylinder. So if I put a ring in here, I can use this to push it down nice and straight, because it's got to be even all the way around. Pull it back out. Then I can use my feeler gauge to check that gap. So you can see it pushed it down and it made it nice and straight and even. And now I can take my feeler gauge and I can stick it in here and get my measurement. And that one is about 18,000. Okay, I've checked my top and bottom ring gap. The top was 22 thousandths and the second was 18 thousandths, which is beautiful. Went ahead and put them on the piston. I'll set my gaps where they need to be. I'll show you that. And then we'll put the ring compressor on it, compress the rings down, put a little bit of oil in the cylinder, go ahead and drive it down. We'll put our first piston in. The one thing I wanted to show you though was put these little condoms on the bolts. They used to come with bearings. You'd get a set of these every time you bought a set of bearings. But I guess they stopped doing it because I haven't gotten any in a while. I used to have about 50 sets of those, but I don't know what happened. If you don't have these, use a piece of fuel hose or something. Whatever you do, when you go to drive this down, put the crankshaft at bottom dead center of the stroke, so the crank is centered and all the way down. And be real careful not to hit the crankshaft. So you put these on here to protect it and help guide it down. Like I said, if you don't have it, just use some fuel hose or something like that, but be real careful not to hit that crankshaft. Alright, I think we're ready. I got the ring gaps in their correct orientation. I put a little bit of lube, assembly lube on the bearing. I got oil in the cylinder. We're going to go ahead and set this guy in here like so. I think we're ready. There it is. Now, I stop once I get it in the hole and reach up underneath here and grab a hold of those two bolt condoms and tap it down. When you get to the crankshaft, go slow. Make sure you're not going to hit the crank. There it is. Ta-da! Now, take your lower, put a little bit of lube on it. Just like with the main caps, you put the bearings in same way. It has to be clean. Nothing on the back side of the bearing, nothing on the cap. And then you set the bearing in there, and I kind of push it down on one side and rotate it in. And be real careful not to scratch the back side of the bearing. Same thing as the main caps. Then, I'm gonna set this down here. Remember the tang, these are all odds. The tang is gonna face towards the front. Set that on there. And you're ready. But, I almost forgot, these, take a little bit of ARP bolt fastener assembly lube on the threads. no thread. There you go. Man, we'll go ahead and torque it. Okay, got it in there. These ARP rod bolts, they get torqued a little bit higher than stock. They get torqued to 45 foot-pounds. So set my torque range to 45 and go ahead and torque it down. There you go. One down. So as you can see what I was talking about earlier, there is the tang. The tang, because that's a number 1, which is odd, it's going to be facing forward. So the tang's going to face forward on here. Number 2 is going to go next to it, and its tang is going to point towards the back. And you can see what I was talking about here with the amount of radius that has to clear on that crankshaft. You see it? So that's why it's important that your rods are facing the right direction and you know which one is odd and even. So there you go. One down, 7 more to go. Normally I do one bank at a time, but I wanted to show this a little bit better, so I went ahead and did number 2 next. So I did 1 first, and I did number 2. So you can see these guys come through, how they protect the crankshaft. So as you drive the piston down, that's going to be how you guide it onto the crankshaft without dinging it. And then you go ahead and pull them off like that. Then you go ahead and put your cap on with a little bit of assembly lube, and then you'll see, sorry, I'm trying to do this one-handed, the tang is going to be on the outside, so the tangs are going to be away from each other. There you go. There you go. It's down, it's torqued. One journal is done, but that's what they look like. So you can always see at a glance what it looks like when the tangs are out. So odds to the front, evens to the back. Now I just got to finish the rest of them. Alright, there it is. All 8 of them installed. Everything torqued. All the rings gapped. I like to put a little bit of oil in the cylinder and a little bit of oil down on the wrist pins and everything, so to make sure that nothing's going to be dry when we first start it up. But yeah, all the rings gapped, 18 and 22, and there it is. Now the next little thing I like to do is before I start putting covers on it and or putting heads on it or anything like that, I like to put the dial indicator on cylinder number 1, just like that, and then I will rotate the engine until I am on positively top dead center number 1, and you'll see when the gauge maxes out and then starts going back down. See that? So I'm gonna put it right back where it was when the gauge is at its highest point, which is right about there. Right there. That way I know I'm on top dead center, absolutely top dead center, because when I put this cover on, I put the harmonic balancer and stuff on, I want to make sure that my timing tab lines up perfectly with the harmonic balancer, because you never know. They could be spun, the harmonic balancer could be spun, the timing tab could be off, you never know. So make sure number 1 is all the way up, absolutely top as high as it'll go, and then we'll put our covers on and harmonic balancer and stuff on, and make sure the timing tab lines up perfectly. Just like that. Got the covers on, a couple of covers on. I'm gonna go ahead and start on the heads. So these head gaskets, they go on, these Velcros, they go on dry. You don't have to put anything on them, none of that copper spray stuff or nothing. Make sure the surfaces are real clean, and where it says up means up. Pretty self-explanatory. Other than that, make sure the heads are clean, and I'm going to start setting them on. Okay, I set one of these up here. Now remember what we did earlier, we chased the threads on all the head bolts with a tap. I'm going to do the same thing with a die with these head bolts. Also, when I go to put a head bolt in, I always put silicone on the threads. So anything that threads in the water jacket, all these bolts, all these head bolts, I'm going to put a little bit of silicone on the threads, and then I'll torque this head down. But before I get there, I'm going to put all these head bolts through a thread chase, and then a little bit of silicone. So they should look about like that. The threads are all cleaned up, and I put silicone on at least 3/4 of the way up. So something like that. Do all your head bolts like this. Alright, here we go. I got one head down. So once I get the head bolts all in, I get them down about hand tight. I don't torque anything yet. And then what you do is, I do it in steps. 65 foot-pounds is your goal, so I'll start at like 45, and you start in the middle, and you're gonna go around in a circle, and you're gonna keep going in a circular pattern till you get all the way out to the end, and do that 45, and then do it at 65, and that's it. All right, here it is. Both heads on, everything torqued, looks good, no problems. I think we're going to call it a day, and pick it back up tomorrow. And let's see, what do we got? Valve train, intake manifold, oil pan, oil pump. We got to paint it, and then it's going to be time to put it on the test stand and fire it up. So that's it for today. See you tomorrow.